Hello class, and welcome to Chapter 1 of our Introduction to Business class for this term. By now, you know who I am. I'm Al Tacone. That's me on the screen. It's kind of the same picture I've been using all along, but throughout the term, you'll see some different pictures of me in there. We're going to be starting off this semester with a chapter on understanding economic systems and business. You know, these videos are also accompanied by the PDF version of my lecture notes in Canvas for every chapter. So please feel free to access those as well as a good way to kind of use as reference as you're completing your weekly requirements. So let's get started by taking a look at the learning outcomes. And since this is an open education resource course, the learning outcomes are matched to your textbook. And usually what I advise students is that you should be using your textbook and or the lecture notes for each chapter to complete your weekly requirements. So at the end of this chapter, which it kind of says after reading this chapter, but really it's after studying this chapter, between reading and watching my lecture videos, and perhaps the PDF of the lectures, you should master how businesses and nonprofit organizations help create our standard of living in the U.S. What are the sectors of the business environment and how do changes in them influence business decisions? What are the primary features of the world's economic systems? We'll look at a number of them, and how are those economic systems impacting the three sectors of the U.S. economy and how they're linked. You should master answering the question of how economic growth, full employment, price stability, and inflation indicate a nation's economic health. How does the government use monetary policy and fiscal policy to achieve economic goals? What are the basic microeconomic concepts of demand and supply, and how do they establish prices? What are the four types of market structures? And finally, which trends are reshaping business, microeconomic and macroeconomic environments and competitive arena? So those are the learning outcomes for this chapter. So you should master these, as I said, through completing your weekly requirements by reading the chapter and studying my lectures. Well, let's start off with taking a look at the basic principles of how a capitalist economy such as the United States operates. There are revenues, which are the total amount of money a business takes in. You compare that to how much the business is spending in order to help it earn that revenue, which are called expenses, and the result will be either a profit or loss. A profit is the amount of money a business earns above and beyond what it spends for salaries and really all of their expenses. A loss occurs when a business's expenses are greater than its revenues. So obviously, what is the goal? It's profit. There are nonprofit organizations, however, who do not have the goals of making a profit. Volunteer organizations that are operated, such as you see an example of the Red Cross here, where the Red Cross is a nonprofit organization where the goal is to spend all of the revenues that it takes in. We measure an economy in a lot of ways. One is by the standard of living of those who live in that economy. So by definition, the standard of living is the amount of goods and services people can buy with the money that they have, no matter how they get that money. Usually it's by earning through wages, but it could be through wealth or other means. The United States has one of the highest standards of living in the world. Workers in other countries may make more money, it's quite possible, but the prices for products are higher. So when you compare how much money is earned by individuals in the United States to what products and services cost in the United States, it results in a higher standard of living than some countries that may make or may have higher wages earned by their individuals who live there, but have to pay higher prices for the goods and services that are produced and sold. We tie that usually to something called quality of life, which is defined as the general well-being of a society in terms of not only what they can buy and their earning power, but its political freedom, its natural environment, the education system, healthcare, how safe it is to live in that country, the amount of leisure and rewards that also add to personal satisfaction. So all of these elements, even if you take a look at them as an individual, would define your quality of life. And quality of life can be defined based upon whatever it is the individual defines it as. The major stakeholders in an economy are all of the people in that economy who stand to gain or lose by policies and activities of a business and whose concerns the businesses need to address. Just to give you some examples, here are examples of stakeholders who are those individuals who do stand to gain or lose by policies or activities of a business. The customers who buy the products and services from the business, its employees, the stockholders in the case of a corporation where the corporation is owned by a variety of stockholders, those who supply to the organization, because obviously organizations buy things and that helps to support those who supply them, dealers, members of the community, media, elected officials, bankers, people who are concerned about the environment are all stakeholders. They care about what businesses are doing within the economy for a variety of reasons, usually defined by their position as a stakeholder. There are three major branches of economics. I'm sorry, two major branches, but economics is defined as the study of how a society employs its resources to produce goods and services for consumption among various groups and individuals. When you study macroeconomics, you're concentrating on the operation of a national economy. In other words, the nation's economy as a whole. Microeconomics concentrates on the behavior of people and organizations in markets for particular products and services. So macro is the big picture, micro is the smaller segments of that big picture. We'll be taking a look at examples of both here as we study Chapter 1. The invisible hand theory of an economy says that as people improve their own situation in life, they help the economy prosper through the production of goods, services, and ideas. So the idea behind the invisible hand is when self-directed gain, in other words, individuals who can direct how they gain and get rewards, leads to social and economic benefits for the whole community. In other words, somebody who's happy with their work and earns a living, earns wages or salary from their work, they'll take that money and spend it on goods and services that others are providing within that economy. So that self-directed gain, the reasons why I want to earn as a wage earner is resulting in me buying those things that make me satisfied. And of course, that in turn benefits all of the others who provide those goods and services. So that's the invisible hand theory, meaning everybody has a stake in the economy's success. And by me, or any individual, seeking out their satisfaction, they're contributing to the economic well-being of that economy, or the individuals in that economy. So let's take a look at an example of how the invisible hand theory might work. Let's say a farmer earns money by selling his or her crops. To earn more, the farmer hires farm hands to produce crops. When the farmer produces more, there is plenty of food for the community. The farmer, as a result, helped his employees and helped his community while helping himself. So you see how that works. Farmer earns money by selling crops. To do that, he needs or she needs to employ more people. When they hire more people, to produce more, there's going to be plenty of food for the community. So the farmer helped the community by providing more food, helped his employees by providing them wages so they can buy what makes them happy, and of course helped himself because he's operating a business that's making a profit. So that's a pretty good example of how to kind of relate the invisible hand theory to a type of business within an economy. The United States economy is founded on capitalism. That's where most of the land, factories, and stores are owned by individuals, not the government. and not operated for profit. So that means individuals in the United States or under any capitalistic or capitalism economy, individuals own the factors of production, and included in factors of production are services, including retail, and retail operations, which are considered companies that sell merchandise. Some examples of countries that are capitalism based are the United States, obviously, you know that from living here, or if you're from another country, the United States is England, Australia, and Canada. Businesses are operated for a profit with the factors of production owned by individuals. State capitalism refers to when a state rather than private owners run some businesses. For example, China and Russia have what are called state capitalism economies. They have experienced some success using some capitalistic principles, but really the future of these economies is uncertain, although as time goes on, they're proving to be more and more successful. For example, when you go to, or you visit China or Russia, you'll see a lot of the same type of operations that you do in the United States, but a lot of the operations, especially utilities, for example, are state-run. But they do have elements of capitalism, and that's called state capitalism. In a capitalist economy, individuals have 4 basic rights: the right to own private property, the right to own a business and keep all of that business's profits, the right to freedom of competition, and the right to freedom of choice. Capitalism is founded on competition. We're going to study a little bit of economics here in Chapter 1, which explains why that's the case. And it's really because what is produced and sold in a capitalist economy like the United States is really what people are willing and able to purchase. So if you can recognize that as a seller, you will produce or sell whatever it is that is demanded in that economy. You're called a supplier. And then once that occurs, others might see that, hey, there's money to be made there. So they are going to compete with you to compete for the same exact customers you're selling to. That's what we mean by the right to compete. And really, a capitalist economy such as the United States is founded on competition and the right to freedom of choice from the buyer's standpoint. So those are the 4 basic rights of capitalism. Capitalism includes a free market system, which means decisions about what and how much to produce are made by the market. I just mentioned supply and demand. Well, what an individual company should be supplying is what is demanded. If nobody wants what you sell, you're not going to be selling them, and therefore you will be not earning a profit. Get a lot of loss that way, but not any profit. So the consumer, that's who buys our products and services, sends signals about what they like and how they like it. The price tells a company how much of a product they should produce. In other words, if you're producing product X and the company produces a certain amount of that product X, the assumption is that they'll sell it all in order to make a profit. So if the price is too high, people won't buy it. That indicates to the company you need to lower the price. If the price is too low and people are just grabbing it, you might want to dabble with raising the price to try to earn more profit. If something is wanted but it's hard to get, that means the price will rise until more products are available. So either you, as a company, will produce more product to sell, or competition will come in to make up the gap for what you cannot produce to sell and meet the demand. Here's a circular flow model which kind of explains how a capitalist economy works. A business exists, and there are households that purchase what we produce, the consumers. So the business produces goods and services, households purchase them, and that allows us as a business to continue to pay for our factors of production to produce more. The consumer, with its buying power, feeds the businesses by buying our goods and services, which in turn inputs payments, which means the households get to work because they work for these businesses that are producing, and allowing them to satisfy their households and their individuals' demands for satisfaction and to live the type of lifestyle that they like. So that's the circular flow model. Regarding pricing, here's an example. A seller may want to sell shirts for $50, but only a few people may buy them at that price. But if the seller lowers the price to $30, more people will buy the shirts. So these are given pieces of information. The seller then establishes a price of $30 based on what consumers are willing to pay. So if you want $50 a shirt, but people won't buy it for $50, you're not going to sell any, or you're not going to sell many. But at $30, you'll sell a lot more. So the key is to make sure that you set a price that consumers are willing to spend for your shirt. But of course, if the shirt is costing you $40 to make and you're only charging $30, well, obviously you're going to lose money per shirt. So the delicate balance is to be able to produce what the market wants at a price that the market is willing to pay for it. And at that point, you will sell the products that you're producing. To divide that up to divvy that up in terms of how it works economically in a capitalist economy from a supply and demand standpoint, what we produce and want to sell to the consumer is called supply. Here's an example of what's called a supply curve, a graphical example, which is saying, and you can see the y-axis is price and the x-axis is quantity of t-shirts. So for example, if the price is $50 per shirt, the quantity of t-shirts we're supplying is a lot, while 50, because we want people to pay $50 per shirt. We don't want to supply very many at a low price because we know we're not going to make any money. So obviously we know that we want to supply a lot more shirts if we can get more money per shirt. But as we just saw, that may not be possible. So we need to compare supply to demand. From the consumer standpoint, the higher the price, the lower the demand. At $50 per shirt, the consumer wants to buy very few, 0 or 5, up to 5. But if the price was $5 per shirt or free, the consumer wants a lot of them. They want all 50 shirts. What we need to do is, as a business, is find the balance between a price that people are willing to pay, and if I go back a slide, the price we're willing to the amount we're willing to supply at that price. So the supply curve will intersect with the demand curve to give us something called an equilibrium point. That's the point at which the supply equals the demand. So the equilibrium, also called market price, is determined by supply and demand. It's what we call the negotiated price. So what we're saying here is at $15 per shirt, if we produce 25 shirts, we will sell all 25 shirts. But we won't make any money because the supply equals the demand. If, however, the price is $20 per shirt, we will supply, you can look at where it intersects here, 20 shirts or so. But the demand, we're willing to supply 10 shirts. The demand will be up here somewhere in the 20s, but we would be losing money. So the equilibrium point is also what we call the break-even point. That's where we break even. We will sell as much as we produce at that particular price. So I'll sell 15 shirts at $25 per shirt. So equilibrium is where supply equals demand. There are 4 degrees of competition that exist: perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. Those are what we call degrees of competition. Free market benefits and limitations include, from a benefit standpoint, allowing for open competition among companies. And remember, United States and capitalism is a free market system. provides opportunities for poor people to work their way out of poverty. But there's the limitation that people may start to let greed drive them. In other words, the more they earn and the more they can make or want to make as profit, the more they want. Socialism is an economic system based on the premise that some basic businesses, as I mentioned earlier, like utilities, should be owned by the government because they believe that the profits should be more evenly distributed. Entrepreneurs will run smaller business in socialism. Citizens are highly taxed in socialism because the utilities and the healthcare systems are operated by the government, so those tax dollars are what pay for those services. And the government is more involved in protecting the environment and the poor, hence the high taxes. The high taxes support what the government does to protect the poor and to protect the environment in socialism. Some benefits that are cited for socialism, as I mentioned, it's social equality. Individuals are treated more equally because there's free education, free health care, free child care, tend to be longer vacations, hence contributing to quality of life. Work weeks are shorter, probably less than the 5-day minimum, 40 to 50 hours a week in the US, and generous sick leave. Again, in socialism, much more emphasis based upon quality of life, but the government manages it, and it has to be paid for through the tax base. So that's why you have the higher taxes. Some negatives of socialism. There are few incentives for business people because the larger types of industry are owned by the government. The term brain drain is sometimes used because some of a country's best and brightest workers, like doctors, lawyers, and business owners, move to capitalistic countries. Because even if you have these positions that earn much higher wages in a capitalist economy like the United States, they'll be more equal in a socialist economy. And it tends to be less innovative in socialist countries because the reward is not as great in capitalistic countries. If you're innovative in a capitalistic economy, you can be rewarded quite nicely by the fact that you are creative and you come up with products and services that are innovative and what people really desire. Communism is another economic system, but this is also a political system where the government makes almost all economic decisions and the government owns almost all of the major factors of productions. Prices don't reflect demand in communism, and that's why in communism you tend to see shortages for basic items like food and clothing, because the government will only produce based upon what it can afford to produce. Once it runs out, there aren't any more. In capitalism, there's incentive to produce more because businesses are trying to fill demand. That is not allowed in a communist economy and political system. So they tend to have waves of depression in communist countries because of the shortages that occur, and citizens tend to fear government repercussions. The two major economic systems, free market economies, just to reiterate, that's a capitalist economy where the market largely determines what goods and services are produced, who gets them, and how the economy grows. And command economies, where the government largely determines what goods and services are produced, who gets them, and how the economy will grow. So free market economy is capitalism. The extreme in command economies would be communism. And socialism, as we just studied, falls somewhere in between, where the government owns some of the businesses, usually the major ones, such as utilities. Mixed economies have kind of the best of all worlds, if you will. They have some allocations of resources made by the market and some are made by the government. Neither the free market nor the command economies have created sound economic conditions, so countries tend to use a mix of these two economic systems. Even the United States, we have some education that's provided by the government or portions of it, like in California in the community college system. You pay a very, very small tuition to take classes in a California community college, and that's because tax dollars are paying to supplement what students pay for tuition, so that we have a mix in California and in most of the United States, you have a mixed economy where the government is contributing to parts of what is produced in the United States or offered as services. The trend is towards mixed economies. Communist countries and governments are disappearing. Social governments are cutting back on social programs in an attempt to lower taxes and move a little bit more towards capitalism. And capitalist countries such as the United States are increasing social programs and moving more towards socialism. Again, because of the demand for issues such as healthcare in the United States. How do we measure economic success? One way is through something called the gross domestic product, or GDP. It's defined as the total value of final goods and services produced in a country in a given year. And this is actually can measure any, GDP can be measured at any type of economy. When the GDP changes, businesses feel the effect. So as long as a company is within a country's border, their numbers go into the country's GDP. So the gross domestic product, as that goes up, that means we are producing as a country greater amounts of final goods and services. And if it goes down, obviously the opposite. The high United States GDP is about $14 trillion, and that is what enables individuals living in the United States to enjoy that high standard of living that was discussed earlier in the chapter. The unemployment rate is another way to measure economic success and stability. That's the percentage of civilians that are at least 16 years old who are unemployed but tried to find a job within the prior 4 weeks. So it's not just unemployed, it's those individuals who are unemployed but who tried to find work in the prior 4 weeks. There are 4 types of unemployment: frictional, structural, cyclical, and seasonal unemployment. Obviously, the lower unemployment rate results in what we would measure or constitute as a stronger economy, and the higher the unemployment rate, a weaker economy. But remember, we're measuring not only the unemployed, but those who were unemployed and also were seeking employment. If you don't want to work, then those individuals are not included in the unemployment rate. Another way to measure economic success is through inflation rates. An inflationary economy is when there's a general rise in the prices of goods and services over time. Disinflation is when the price increases are slowing over time. In other words, there's still price increases, but the pace of the increase is slowing over time. Deflation means prices are declining because too few dollars are chasing too many goods, meaning there's a lot of product and services out there, but not as many individuals want to buy. And stagflation means the economy is slowing, but prices are going up. So obviously inflation is bad news because prices of goods and services are rising over time. Disinflation, good news because prices are increasing, but at a slower rate. Prices declining because too few dollars are chasing too many goods is deflation, good for the consumer, bad obviously for the seller, whose prices have to decline just to try to sell their products. And stagflation means that the economy is slowing down through these other rates of measurement, but prices are still going up. That's also bad news because that means the economy is slowing, meaning probably from an employment standpoint, it's slowing, but that means the individuals can't afford as much because while the economy is slowing down and they may not be getting paid as much, the prices are rising. Not a good match from a consumer standpoint. The Consumer Price Index is a monthly statistic that measures the pace of inflation or deflation. So if you go back to the previous slide, these would be measured by something called the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. The government computes the cost of goods and services, such as what you see here, to see if they are going up or down. The wages, rents and leases, tax brackets, government benefits, interest rates of some citizens are all based upon the Consumer Price Index because all of these are part of what a consumer spends money on besides the goods and services that they purchase. Productivity in the United States has risen due to the technological advances that have made production faster and easier. Technology obviously has an impact on improving productivity because we can do things and produce things more efficiently and effectively. Productivity in the service sector is less impacted by technology than producing goods. The higher the productivity, the lower the cost of producing goods and services, so that helps to lower prices because they're operating more efficiently. New technology does add to the quality of services provided, but not to the workers' output in a service industry. And probably a new form of measurement needs to be created to account for the quality as well as the quantity of output. Because when we're talking about the service sector, we're talking about individuals serving consumers, and technology does not have as major an impact on that as improving technology in a factory that allows it to produce more product, to operate more efficiently on a given day, month, week, or year. There are 4 business cycles that an economy will go through, especially capitalist. A business cycle is the measurement of periodic rises and falls that occur in economies over time. There are 4 different phases: economic boom, recession, depression, and recovery. Economic boom is obviously the high point, where relatively low or little inflation, high employment, or if you want to look at the other way, low unemployment. Recession means 2 or more consecutive quarters of decline in the gross domestic product. A depression is a severe version of a recession, meaning, yes, we're having 2 or more consecutive quarters of decline in GDP, but it's a severe decline, more severe than normal if you compare it to the past 1 to 5 years. And economic recovery is when the economy is stabilizing and starts to grow. The result means we hopefully get back to a new cycle that starts with an economic boom. So it's a boom, recession, depression, recovery, which hopefully leads back to the beginning of a new cycle that always begins with an economic boom. The government can help to improve the economy through fiscal policy or monetary policy. Fiscal policy means the federal government is using efforts to keep the economy stable by increasing or decreasing taxes or government spending. In other words, by the government increasing its spending, they are pumping more money into the economy because the government is buying products and services. Similarly with taxation, if the government reduces taxes, that results in individuals having more money to spend on products and services. So the less taxes one pays, the more money they have to spend on goods and services. That's one premise of fiscal policy, along with the government spending increase, which means that if the government is spending money on goods and services, it's pumping money into the economy, hence improving businesses being able to support their employees, their profitability, and all of those aspects that make a business successful. Some other areas that we look to when trying to define how well an economy is functioning: the national deficit, which is how much money the government spends beyond what it collects in taxes; national debt, which is the total of the government deficits over time; or a national surplus, when the government takes in more than it spends. Very rare occurrence. We are certainly, in the United States, have a national debt, which is a sum of all of the deficits that have occurred over time. Good thing if you want to study, look up online and see how much the current national debt is, and maybe share that with the class in the discussion board. Monetary policy is another way that the government can manage money supply and the economy. It's called monetary policy, and that's done by interest rates being impacted by the Federal Reserve Bank, or the Fed. The Fed's most visible role in increasing or lowering interest rates: when the economy is booming, they tend to increase interest rates. In other words, the economy is doing so well that the Fed can increase interest rates to lender banks, and those increased rates are passed on to the consumer. when the economy is in recession, the Fed tends to decrease interest rates so that it gives the opportunity for consumers and businesses to borrow money at that lower interest rate. The idea being, if they have money that they can borrow, they're going to spend it within the economy, hence contributing to a better economy, leading us through that cycle to recycle back to a boom if necessary. Oh, I'm going to go back one slide. I'm sorry, because that was the last slide for the chapter. I forgot about that. But that's our chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, you should view this video lecture, use the PDF version of the PowerPoint slides in this lecture, and of course, all of the material contained in your chapters when you're completing your weekly requirements. So please go forth now and complete your your week 1 requirements, which include chapter 0, the orientation to the class, and your chapter 1 requirements. I hope that worked for you. I think once you get the hang of doing 1 week's requirements, you will be on a good rhythm to completing all of the remaining week's requirements for the course. I look forward to being with you for chapter 2. For now, best wishes as you complete your week 1 requirements. Have a great week.